You're listening to the Place We Find Ourselves podcast. I am joined today by Scott Gibson, who is a therapist in the Chicago area. Scott graciously shares a story about himself as an 11-year-old boy. It's a story about desire, about devastation, and especially about attachment. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Scott. Okay, I have Scott Gibson on the line. Scott, it is good to see you again.
Good to see you again too, Adam.
Scott was on episode 14 back in season 1, and we talked a fair bit about how trauma affects our bodies, and we talked a little bit about how you came to engage your story. But the conversation went in a direction that I didn't want to interrupt, and so we never got to your actual story that you had written and that you were willing to share. And so we're returning to that today, and we're just going to start with your story. So I want to invite you to read it.
When I was 10, my twin brother Steve and I entered our dog into 4-H dog obedience. We both went to the classes, worked with our little rat terrier puppy, and it was decided that since only one of us could actually work the dog in the competition, that it would be him. I'm not sure how that was decided, but it was. Muffet, our dog, ended up doing very well that first year and ended up taking first in the first year category and grand champion in the whole competition in our county 4-H fair. I did get my picture in the paper with my two brothers and Muffet and the trophies and ribbons that she won. Of course, they made a home in my brother Steve's room. So the following year, I was talking with my Aunt Mary, and she had a fox terrier puppy that was your typical untrained farm dog that I played with when I was visiting their farm. I asked my mom if I could have the dog, Chips, for a dog for me to train and compete with. She said no, but that didn't stop me. I later approached my aunt and uncle at church and asked them if they would be open to me borrowing the dog for 6 months, March to August, so I could enter him in the 4-H fair. It was miraculous. I was rather tenacious, but I somehow convinced my mom and dad to adopt Chips for a season while I trained and competed in the 4-H fair. I was elated. Chips came to our home and lived in the garage with our other dog, Muffet. Before the obedience class began, I started his training. We immediately bonded, two orphans, both very unattached to our mothers. Every day we played and trained for what I knew was going to be a colossal event for my then 11-year-old heart. My brother Steve continued to train our dog Muffet as he would be competing in year 2. Our class began, and it was very clear early on that Chips and I had a substantial lead in his ability to perform. He was very smart, and he loved to please me. There were also lots of adventures of me taking him with me, and we soon became a pair. I would sometimes think about the reality that he would be leaving at the end of the 4-H fair experience, but push those thoughts away with the hope that maybe I could convince my parents to keep Chips forever. A week before the 4-H competition, the instructor had a mock trial. Chips won that hands down, and I took home my plastic trophy of first place with the sight of grand championship in the horizon. Up to that point, I had never wanted anything more. On the morning of the competition, I loaded up Chips into the car along with treats, water, and his leash. Steve and Muffet were there as well, and the car ride was silent. My game face was on, and I needed to focus. When we got to the county fair, we were informed by the judge that the rules for first year had been changed, and it was now required that we perform our task all off-leash. Our instructor objected in that this information had not been communicated clearly. So they made a provision that we could do the event on leash, but we would have an automatic deduction. Chips had done all of the events before off-leash, and in order to be eligible for grand championship, I would need to do them off-leash. I was the only one in our class that chose that path, but I wanted to beat Steve and Muffet. Chip performed each event flawlessly. At the end of each segment, they gave you a piece of paper with the score, so I was aware of just how I compared to Steve's score. Up to the last event, the long down stay, I was ahead. In the long down stay, they lined up all the dogs next to each other, and we walked across the ring about 20 feet away. 3 minutes, that's all I needed, and it looked like I would be the new grand champion. About 2 minutes into it, the German Shepherd next to Chip started to squirm, and his handler, the boy next to me, started to get nervous and began making gestures to get his dog to stay down. Chip saw this boy and started to get scared and got up and ran to me. I called him to come, and I knew that it was over. The tears immediately began to flow, and for the remaining minute, I had to wait in the center of the ring while the 3 minutes finished. Chip knew that our dream had died and brought comfort to my 11-year-old heart with each lick of a tear. Of course, Steve and Muffet did win their class and for the second year grand champion. That year, I chose not to be in the picture with Muffet for the paper, though my parents wanted me to join them.
Thank you, Scott, for reading it. Can we go back kind of to the beginning and just go through it together, reflecting on some parts that really stuck out to me?
Sure.
I want to read the first few sentences back to you and then ask a question. Here's how it begins. When I was 10 years old, my twin brother, so your twin brother Steve, and I entered our dog into 4-H dog obedience. We both went to the classes, worked with our little rat terrier puppy, and it was decided that since only one of us could actually work the dog in the competition, that it would be him. I'm not sure how that was decided, but it was. I have twin brothers. They're 2 years younger than me. And when I heard this part of the story, I immediately felt this twist in my gut. And I thought about my twin brothers, and I thought about one of them being chosen to show the dog and one of them being chosen to sit on the sidelines. Now that you've reflected on the story, do you have any sense of why or how it was decided that your twin brother Steve would be the one to show Muffet?
It's interesting because it feels so like normal, but I think in it I'm naming something too, that there were choices that were made that impacted. I don't know, right? But I'm going to say what it feels like, what was put to be true, right? Is the rat terrier came from my grandfather, my mother's father, right? And so the tension that I've had with my mother, growing up especially, and still to still some extent this day, I think that the fact that she made the choice, that would be Steve, is in line with a lot of other choices, that looking back now, I go like, well, of course. I mean, there was something being played out between her and I, and really Steve and her as well too. When I read how I wrote it, and then I reflected on like, oh my goodness, what am I saying there? Like, part of me knew, right? Part of me knew, and yet I just had come to the point of just kind of accepting that, like, I'm not going to get chosen. I'm going to get chosen for a different thing than chosen for what Steve got chosen for. The thing that I have had to figure out decades later is just that, like, there was something being played out where I had to kind of work for an attachment with my mom.
Yeah, and if I'm hearing you right, you had to work for it in a way that Steve didn't.
Right.
So can you say a bit more about that? Because there's inherent in that, there's a rivalry between you and your twin. Yeah.
Actually, when you and I talked last time, we talked about recovery week. After recovery week, Steve and I got together, right? And we had the most interesting conversation, right? That was just like really more honest and open and real than we've ever had, right? At one point, he said, you know what, I've always been jealous of you. You know what I mean? Because you were Dad's favorite. And I said, well, that came with a cost, but you were Mom's favorite, right? And so it was just really like a really, in some ways, very healing as well as like redemptive conversation to kind of say, oh, we both know. We both knew that like each of us got picked. And I just had come to like I said, in a road, I didn't understand why, but it made sense that I wasn't going to do that, even though I put in just as much work with training the dog and taking care of feeding and all that kind of stuff. We all get chosen for a role in our family. And it was how we talked, you've talked about triangulation, right? So it's just how Steve and I were triangulated and constantly compared.
Yes. You and Steve were compared by your mother, and your mother in some ways chose Steve.
Yes. Yeah.
And so even though you participate in Muffet's training and caretaking as much as Steve, not only does Steve show Muffet, but when Muffet wins, the ribbons and the trophies and the accolades end up in his room and not yours.
Right.
And it dawned on me as I was listening that, some of the ribbons or the trophies could have ended up, you could have shared them.
I know, right? But when you're saying that even now, Adam, it's just like, wow, I hadn't thought of that, right?
Let's just reflect on that for a minute, because I think this is so true to our stories. It takes somebody else like raising a point like that to even make us realize, oh, it could have been different.
Right.
So what's it like for you even now as I bring up just the vision of a trophy making it, or a ribbon making it into your room and another making it into Steve's room? Like, what's that like even to consider?
Ribbons, trophies, competition are like bring me so much life, right? I mean, it's just like, if you give me, I mean, it's why I've run all these marathons in my life and I'm now competing with these dogs I have now in dog agility. And it's just like, anything that I've done, I try to do my best, and just, it's not about being perfect. It's about like, I love the thrill of just like the competition, and can I be better? Can I pull something inside of me and find a faster time, a better experience, whatever, right? Like, I would have loved the ribbons. You should see my basement, right? It's littered with dog trophies and marathon medals. I come alive in the competition. The excitement, the adrenaline, all of that. I feel more embodied and connected. It's sad because I just feel like they really missed who I was. Or they didn't, right? I don't know what to make of it, right? Either they missed of who I was, or they saw who I was and it stirred something up in my mom that she just didn't know what to do with. So either one, the same effect, right? It's the same instance where I'm not getting celebrated for who God uniquely made me in how I love the competition.
I mean, even as I listen to the story, it's almost inconceivable that your mother didn't know that 11-year-old was competitive and wanted to win and cherished Muffet and loved these dog competitions. I mean, is that a fair assumption?
She knew. She was my competition.
And so when you get Chips, you have this really provocative sentence in your story where you say, we immediately bonded, two orphans, both very unattached to our mothers.
Yeah.
Tell me about that sentence, Scott.
I mean, it's hard to say, right? Because I don't want it to be true. And I saw that, looking back now, right? I don't think I realized what my body was doing with Chips, obviously, other than just like connecting and feeling attached. But I felt seen. I felt like Chips saw me. And, it's like it happened yesterday. This is decades ago, right? But I still can like feel in my body when I'm teaching him to sit and to heel and to down. His look at my face is just, I didn't know what to do with it in some ways, right? It was just like, wow, this creation of God like is just enjoying me.
And for your 11-year-old heart, Chips's limbic brain and his eyes looking at you, there was a connection there. And I don't know what other word to use. It ministered to your heart.
It really, looking back now, it was my first experience with God. It's like a God that sees me.
Yes.
And smiles or pants, right? He just would have this like smile on his face. Now, maybe he was like thirsty or because I was giving him treats, but it for that 11-year-old, it was just like to feel that just delight and feel like that here's this creature that just loves me and just wants to be with me and please me. It was just, heaven on earth.
Yes. And it also seems to suggest that there was an ache in that 11-year-old about not being seen for 11 years.
Yeah, and I think that's what connects to what we've talked about before as far as why I did get picked. It's funny because I look back even in childhood, and I don't think I'm like an introvert. But when I look at how I behaved, like you would have called me shy. Looking back, I can see now that like I had really pulled in, and just gotten used to the dynamic that it's the world's scary and I'm not going to be seen.
Yes.
Which, in other stories then set me up for when someone does see me and they're not safe and I can't see that. So that's one of my favorite parts of this story is just my tenacity to kind of go after. I still remember that day when I just begged my aunt. And I think it really was it was like my Aunt Mary who had some compassion and saw my like, come on, come on, I'll be great. I'll teach him, he'll be a good dog after I teach him, all that kind of stuff.
And so this 11-year-old is so alive in many ways, even though you're putting language to how unseen you were as a boy. And yet, it's just, there's so much happening in this story beneath the surface. Like, I love the way you talk about your 11-year-old heart when you said, every day, you're talking about Chips, and you said, every day we played and trained for what I knew was going to be a colossal event for my 11-year-old heart. And whenever we reflect on one of the core stories of our lives, we have to remember the age of the boy or girl in the story. Our tendency is to think back on ourselves as a younger boy or girl and forget what it's like to be that young, tender age. This 11-year-old, and you write it so well, and it's because you're so connected to him now, he's elated about the prospect of winning this competition.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, this is an enjoyable kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
A kid that it would be easy to root for.
Yeah.
And to enjoy and delight in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for some reason, that was not your experience in your home.
Right. Right. Yeah. There just were too many messes and things that made it hard for my mom to really get excited about stuff, which is sad. It's just like I have three boys. They're all grown men, obviously now, but it's like, those were just fun days to see them get dirty, go play, adventures. She wasn't able to really enjoy that. And Dad was away working a lot, so I think it was just, her focus on keeping the house clean and mud off of the carpeting, just got in the way of really enjoying and again, something obviously getting played out for her between the two of us, Sadly, still is kind of at play at times, but yeah, that 11-year-old imagination beyond imagination, right? It's just like this event was going to take us to the evening news, right? It was just like, they're going to probably make a movie about this someday kind of a thing, right? As a 60-year-old, I know they're not, obviously now, but back then it was just like, and to feel all that in our body, right? In my body. The adrenaline, I could hardly eat that morning for breakfast. It was just like, the car ride, even describing the car ride, I remember it was just like, I had one thought. I was kind of going through every event and rehearsing everything we had practiced and focused and watching Chips to make sure he was doing okay. And it was just, it was like the Super Bowl.
Yeah. And our tendency or the pull when we think back on ourselves as younger boy or girl And as you're doing now, you're remembering how it was like game time for you in the car, and you're playing out each event. Our tendency is to think that's foolish. That boy was foolish. But I can see your face right now. There's none of that on your face. So speak a bit about how is it that you came to move from what I'm assuming is kind of a posture of, that silly little 11-year-old.
Right, because you survive, right? You survive. I mean, when you see your mother's face of contempt pretty regularly, and even like with me not being chosen, you get used to. I think that's what was at play with me being so pulled in. I mean, how that's changed is by engaging in some of these stories and others, right? And being with the heartbreak, of that 11-year-old, right? And in some ways, as well, asking for forgiveness from him, that I joined kind of the judgment
Against him.
So a lot of repentance, from me to really say, I'm sorry, and embody just the pain of what it's like for an 11-year-old to be shut down. 11-year-olds are really forgiving. And like I said, even with the current, stuff I'm doing with my dogs at work, as well as in this agility thing, every day we train with the dogs, or every day we take them to the office, I get to say thank you. I get to say, wow, you're cool. I love who you are. God made you so beautifully. I'm glad I didn't leave this earth without missing that. It's like, thank you. And thanks God, right? That I got to reconnect with him and really bless him.
Yes, that's really the word. I mean, just the posture on your face right now is you are blessing the 11-year-old in the car who's going through every event, who couldn't eat breakfast.
Right.
There's something in you of awe of him.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's just amazing, right? And, it's easy to see, I think, in your own kids or in other people, but to see it in yourself is a lot more different, especially because I got used to just seeing a different face of judgment. I heard Dan speak at Willow back in the 80s, 90s, somewhere in there, right, kind of thing. And he had asked the questions kind of like, where did you first see the face of God, right, kind of thing. And the first immediate thing that came to mind was chips. And I didn't share that with anybody because I thought that's people are going to think I'm stupid or crazy, right, that I'm talking about a dog. It should be my grandmother, my grandfather, my parents. But as my body sat with that reality, it was like, yes, this was how God showed up to me first,
Yes.
Even though I had grown up in a Sunday school where you learned all the Bible stories and all that, it was like I felt God in a relationship. He was there. And he saw me, and he panted, and he smiled, and he wagged his tail at me. I couldn't have done this by myself, because the only face that I could see to this 11-year-old was one of kind of humiliation and judgment, what I had gotten used to, right? And I had joined that. It was the only option to survive, is to kind of join that. So now I'm prepared to protect him in some ways, right, from judgment. But now I've joined it too. And so I would read this story or other stories to friends, to therapists, to, elder people that I've gotten to know through the years. And they would have almost this blank stare that looked like they were in the next county over. And I felt like the only one in the room. And I would get pissed at times saying why aren't you joining me? And they would kindly say, it feels like you're asking us to join you in judgment or humiliate this 11-year-old. And we can't do that. And so they kindly helped me repent.
And so while we're on the topic of what I'll call the glory of that 11-year-old, there's another part of the story that just made me smile. And it's the part where you decide as an 11-year-old boy that you're going to do the stuff off leash.
Yeah.
No one else did.
I know.
How have you come to explain your decision as an 11-year-old boy to take that risk?
I mean, it's both beautiful and heartbreaking, right? Because the beautiful part about it is like, it's almost like, a friend of mine once said to me, like, you jump and then before you even know if there's a bottom or not, right? So I mean that's what's beautiful, right? But it's sad too because I'm like, he just wanted to be seen. It's sad because I knew at some level that wasn't going to get me seen, you know.
So as the story kind of comes to really the climactic moment of heartache, but again, of glory, the tears start to flow when it is clear that you are going to lose because Chips has gotten startled. And there's something just so glorious about the sentence. The tears immediately began to flow. I mean, this is a very tender 11-year-old boy. You have in no way killed or deadened your sensitivity, your heart. Your heart is so open at this point, and in this sense, it's open to being devastated.
Well, and especially with Chip there, right? I think the power of feeling so seen and so attached, like it felt safe. I still feel like this happened yesterday, right? I mean, I can feel it, I can see it, I can just, and like I know there were like probably 400 or 500 people in the grandstands of this event, right? Kind of thing, all the parents of the children, right? But to me, it was just Chips and I. The power of being seen and feeling attached, right? You feel safe to be, like you said, you're open to being devastated, but also it's safe. And it wasn't the first time that he licked the tears from my face.
And so you're saying something really profound, if I'm hearing it right, which is your heart opened itself naturally to grief when you felt safe in the presence of somebody that you were securely attached to.
Yeah, and it felt like the only thing that I could do, like it was over. And this amazing dream had taken a different turn. And I think it was the only thing that could honor and bless the beauty of that dream. Like what I had been imagining in the car ride.
Yes.
Was gone. And it was like Chips knew that. And I think we were connected on like that he knew it was over too. And yet, we had each other, right? I mean, that's just like, I wasn't alone in the grief. The lick of each tear from his tongue just felt like care I hadn't known.
Yes.
It might sound weird, but it just feels like I was receiving such kind and loving and attuned to care with every tear. Was like validated, seen, witnessed, held. Every tear was being honored and felt and blessed.
I'm there in the story and I'm seeing Chips comforting you. And I'm also aware that your parents are in the stands.
Yeah.
And at some point in the next, 5 minutes, 30 minutes, do they come to you? What's your interaction with your parents?
Wow, that's interesting. Like it's hard for me to imagine what happened. So it's just so easy for me to remember what happened with Chips and I, right? And I believe, as best as my memory serves me, that they tried to say consoling, like, hey, you did your best, or made some comment about you were the only one off leash, so you should be proud of yourself, or, that kind of thing. But I still felt alone, you know what I mean? They didn't join me. They tried to help me get out of the sadness, because they saw the tears that were still on my cheeks, So it became about them.
There's just this juxtaposition between like the comfort of this dog.
Yeah.
And the presence of your parents and perhaps words, but it didn't comfort your heart in the way that Chips was comforting your heart.
Not at all. I mean, the feeling that I have now thinking about that moment, because I can kind of see them coming towards me after I exit the ring kind of thing. And it was almost like I didn't want to even see them because I knew at some level, not consciously probably even, but I knew at some level in my body that I was just not going to get what Chips had just given me.
Yes. And I think that this is so thematic in many of our stories where we do not have attuned, responsive, and engaged parents. And therefore, when we're in need, we try and find other places for comfort because we know that there's not going to be comfort from mom or dad. And your heart, your 11-year-old heart, found comfort in the limbic brain of a dog. And that's in no way to minimize the beauty of your relationship with this dog, but it is to acknowledge that you didn't need a lot.
Right. I mean, when you think about, like, there were seconds, a minute, but 60 seconds of a dog licking my tear-filled cheeks, right? Again, in that service, when Dan asked us the thing, where did you first meet God? I immediately went to that moment, right? Because it felt, still does, right? I can feel it right now, right? It felt heavenly. It felt like gospel. Like, I am loved. I'm loved just because I'm loved. Just because.
So if we could, as we kind of move toward ending, I want to talk some about this whole notion of receiving comfort and our deep need as younger children for comfort, as adults, our deep need for comfort. But for so many of us, wars rage around receiving comfort. You're nodding. How has that been true in your life?
I mean, specifically, I think it shows up a lot it showed up a lot in my most intimate relationship with my spouse. My wife's a first grade teacher, and I get to see her, and I've seen her up close with her own sons. Like, she is just a female version of Mr. Rogers. When I look at who God made her to be, she's just like, she's a type 9, right? So she just is embracing of everybody right where they're at. And, like, it terrifies me. So it terrifies me. And the beauty of, right, that's who she is that she's human, but she stayed pretty consistent with, like, being pretty grounded in herself and just kind of let me flail about or whatever. And so once I started engaging in some of these and other stories, I realized the setup here.
Scott, thank you. Thank you for your vulnerability today. Thank you for your tears today. Thank you for doing the labor of stepping into your stories. I mean, you have clearly experienced levels of freedom and joy as a result of some really hard labor, and it hasn't been easy. And it's been a long journey. But you're so connected to that 11-year-old, and your posture is one of blessing.
It's worth it. And there's more to come, right? So there's more freedom and more suffering, right? But, like, it's going to be worth it.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Place We Find Ourselves. If you resonated with Scott's words today, you might want to go back and listen to episode 14, in which Scott talks more about his own story, particularly with regard to engaging the harm of sexual abuse. Thank you to Rick Wilson and Rob Mathis for providing the music for today's podcast. The last episode of Season 2 will be released in 2 weeks.